Welcome to the Mad and Crip Theology podcast, hosted by Miriam, Spies, and Panton, which come out of the Canadian Journal of Theology, Mental Health, and Disability.
We both live and work on lands that have been homes and remain homes to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron Wendat, the Neutral, and the Ojibway Chippewa peoples and other peoples who have cared for the land.
We are grateful for the opportunity to live and work on this land and are mindful of the need to repair broken covenants.
This podcast is an opportunity to model how faith communities can engage in theological and spiritual conversations around madness and cripness.
If you need a full transcript, you can find our videos on our YouTube channel.
We want to say before we begin that topics and conversations we are raising throughout our time together are often hard.
They are hard for Mad and Crip people ourselves, and hard for our families and loved ones.
So do what you need to do to take care of yourselves, your bodies, minds, and hearts.
And now, here is our episode. Welcome to today's podcast. We're delighted to have Krysia Waldock and Dr, two of our amazing authors from our first edition. Krysia did a piece about online church during COVID, and it's poured in the poem his relationship with his body. Really good stuff. If you haven't read them yet, please do check them out. Now Amy can help us get going.
Thanks, Mir. Yeah, so we just want to say thank you so much for coming today to both of you. And Krysia even gave up her Friday night because she's in the UK and it is around 7 o'clock at night there. So thank you so much for that. And I was hoping now we could ask you both to introduce yourselves. I'm just going to put into the chat what we're hoping that you can tell everyone. So just your name and your pronouns, your work and your academic location, and your connection to mental health and disability. Also, how do we know you? And if you could please give us a visual description of yourself, like what you're wearing and what you look like, that would be really great for accessibility. So, Krysia, I'm going to ask you to go first, okay? Welcome.
Okay, so my name is Krysia, and my pronouns are either she, her, or they, them. I'm currently based at the Tizard Centre, which is an academic department at the University of Kent, which is based in the southeast of the United Kingdom. I'm an autistic PhD candidate in the field of critical autism studies and sociology of religion. Nice. So my research is looking at the social inclusion and belonging of autistic people in religious and humanist groups. My connection to the journal is I basically saw an advert on Facebook and thought, I will write something, and made a punt and had a go, especially as I'm the only person in my department doing anything like what I'm doing. I find connecting to people really, really important. So visual description of me, I'm a person with dark red curly hair and pale white skin and brown eyes, but they're covered by red tinted glasses with tortoiseshell frame, and I have a grey jumper on.
Thank you so much and welcome. We're so glad you're here. And Mike?
Thanks, Amy. My full name is Michael Alexander Walker. Call myself Mike. My pronouns are he, his, and him. For work, I work remotely for the Ontario College of Art and Design on a wonderful project called Our Doors Are Open, which I'm happy to expand on later. I have a PhD from the University of Toronto, which is part of how I know the editors of the journal. We are colleagues, and we do a theology of disability. My connection to mental health and disability is I am a person with spastic cerebral palsy who also experiences a certain amount of anxiety and depression. And my connection to the journal is that another colleague back in probably like October said that I should send off one of my poems to Amy and Miriam. So I did so. And I'm connected to the editors because, again, we are friends and colleagues from the University of Toronto. Visual description of oneself. I am a man with significant male pattern baldness. The parts of my head that are not bare are covered in brown and gray hair. I have a light beard. I am currently wearing a very ratty old dress shirt. It's blue and a white undershirt. What do I look like? Technically, I'm 5'9", but my spine's not straight, so that's not an accurate measurement. And I have hazel eyes and a very intense expression. That should do it, I hope.
Yes, thank you, Mike. That was awesome. That was I'm sure everybody can imagine both of you now. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I think Miriam's going to start us off with her first question for today.
Cool.
So you both wrote essays that wrestled with your particular bodies and minds. Sometimes loving your bodies and sometimes your body's minds being a source of pain. So we wondered about if you could talk to us about living in and between these experiences. And connected to that, name a theologian or academic in disability studies who has influenced or continues to influence your own theology of the body-mind. A big question, but I think both of you can give us so much food for thought. So, Krysia, how about you get us started? You're on mute for now.
Oh, I'm now unmuted. So I guess for me, I don't solely locate the pain I experience within my body and my brain and my autistic being. Rather, what I experience is the consequence of systemic and ongoing marginalization and oppression for me as an autistic person within different settings, and this does include the church. And I guess this almost echoes the social model of disability, which I think can be quite misunderstood sometimes, with a kind of discount on the fact that people do experience pain or where the locus of it is. And I guess in terms of my own experience of being at this kind of, I'd say injuncture, but that's quite a posh, we're kind of in this position or intersection. It's tiring and it's frustrating. And I personally see all people and all humans as made in God's image, leading to us all being kind of equal value. So these kind of the systemic barriers put in place feel quite socially and humanly constructed and kind of against inclusion and equal value. So two key thinkers that have shaped, I guess, my academic word and also inadvertently my theology as well. Neither are theologians. One comes from social work and one comes from sociology, but they both do intertwine quite well with the theology I have, are Dr. Mike Oliver and Dr. Damien Milton. And So Mike Oliver was the pioneer of the social model of disability after obviously the papers were written up by UPIAS. Obviously it went forward academically from Mike Oliver. And kind of a brief overview of the social model of disability in a couple of sentences in case listeners or viewers aren't so sure. It's where a way of viewing the world which is people are disabled by barriers in society and not by their impairment or difference. And I believe this kind of moves us away from a medical and pastoral model of disability where disabled and neurodivergent people are seen as objects of charity to be healed or patted on the head or kind of dealt with and sorted, and that we have agency in ourselves and how we experience the world is real and valid. And with Dr. Damien Milton, who is one of my colleagues at the University of Kent, his double empathy problem theory is a key theory in autism, critical autism studies. And this is where people with very different experiences of the world, so kind of autistic and non-autistic people, find it really hard to empathize with each other. And again, it's this mutual mismatch, which kind of doesn't pin one person as broken or less or of less value. And this echoes Genesis 1:27 and doesn't put people as in society standards where they may be deviant or stigmatized, whereas we're all of value. And I guess my theology in that way is that all people are of equal value. We are all in God's image.
Thank you so much, Krysia. Now, Mike, can you lead us down your thinking?
Sure. Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, that was a way more denser and much more thorough answer than I think I was going to give, Krysia.
Yeah.
Thank you. So jumping off part of what Krysia said, the social model is definitely important to me. So as a person with spastic CP, I experience small amounts of chronic pain and constant spatial disorientation. That makes its way directly into the sonnet that I wrote for the journal. And how do I live in between experiences of pain? There really isn't any in between the pain because parts of it are constant. And one of the things the ancients say, and there are many, so I won't cite them all, but pain is a tool. Pain is like a sword, helps you focus. And that's what I find when I am experiencing pain. It gives me something to focus on and not necessarily something to overcome, because part of the social model is that we don't overcome stuff as people with disabilities. We engage in interdependence. And to go back to what Krysia said, we have a lot of our own agency. We live through our pain and we manage our pain. And insofar as I can do that pain management successfully, part of my experience of God is in the management of my pain. And I try to turn parts of it outwards so that I can engage with other people, because otherwise I would be full of self-pity and that would not work out very well. And I feel like part of the sonnet was self-pitying, the part about hating my body, but we'll come back to that. And theologians or academics who helped me to think through that. Initially, I was going to say Vanier, but we know how people feel about Vanier these days. I think if there were only one person, I would call on Sharon Betcher, who used to work, an independent theologian, used to work at the Vancouver School of Theology. And she writes a post-colonial pneumatology of disability, so a theology of the Holy Spirit, where she talks about people of able body as normates, right? Which is rather strong language. And then people with disabilities making the world go on through our experiences of pain and disengagement and disorientation. And I think one of the things that weight training, which is what the sonnet was about, helps me do is make the world go on, and also brings me into a state of relative peace with my somewhat fragmented body, so that the first thing I feel in the morning is not simply sadness or anger or confusion, but I can often also feel joy as kind of an undercurrent. And the other thing that I find, and we'll come back to this later, is that relationships also help. Relationships are a crucial way of engaging with the world, so that my model of disability is not solipsistic and singular, but social, to go back to what Krysia said. Is that a clear enough answer?
That's super cool. Thank you so much, Mike and Krysia. Mike, I really love Sharon Betcher, so that she's had a huge impact on me too, and same with Mike Oliver. So I'm delighted we're having these conversations about being honest about places of pain and lament, and being honest about places of joy and celebration that are not dichotomies in my life anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So, Amy, over to you.
Thank you. And I really appreciate both of your responses there. Thank you so much. Mike, I was wondering if you could read your poem for us. We would really love to hear it. And then
Sure.
I'll ask you a question about it after. Thank you.
Okay, you bet. 1 second.
Sure.
I have the link. Let me just call it up. Okay. So I can see the author note, but not the poem itself. That's fascinating.
Oh, just click on the side. You'll see PDF or HTML.
Okay.
You just pick
Cool.
one, whichever
All
one
right.
works better for you.
You bet.
We'll get it going. Don't worry.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, awesome.
Love/hate, a poem. I love my body. My thin arms can lift 100 pounds without much ache or strain. My core is strong. My feet are light and swift enough to lope along to joy's refrain. I hate my body. My back's not straight. Some days, the only thing I feel is pain. I hate my halting right leg, and my gait will slow me as I walk on through the rain. I live a paradox and feel on sound. Sharp love and hate are so conjoined in me that my emotions cast me to the ground. I do not know how all these things can be. I must seek stillness in my body's strife and wrestle from my paradox, my life. Shall I read the note as well?
Yes, please.
Sure. So, ironically, I wrote this sonnet with a slightly different rhyme scheme in October of 2014 initially, so a long time ago, shortly after a day at the gym at U of T, where I did like 40 chin-ups, 4 sets of 10 repetitions at a 110-pound counterweight, I think. The sonnet describes my relationship to my body rather fully. I love my body because it is relatively strong, slender, and sinewy. I have more muscle than I did when I was 17, that's for sure. That said, I also experience spastic cerebral palsy and scoliosis and all that those conditions entail. So I often hate my body because I will regularly walk into walls or nearly fall when I'm moving towards a goal, or lose my grip on an object, or as in this case, simply be slowed down slightly as I go for a walk in the rain. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer asserts, the suffering God can help. That said, I sometimes wonder whether God sees my pain and whether he or she really wants to alleviate my pain. And I've written about that as well.
Thank you so much, Mike. What a moving poem.
Yeah.
And as somebody who also lives with chronic pain, I share your tears. I
Thanks.
share your getting mad at God a lot of days and living in a medication fog a lot of the time. So we are one in that spirit, I think, of having gone through a lot of pain. So
yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I was reading, being the nerd that I am, I was reading over some of my notes from my exams the other day, and a quote came up from Teresa of Avila, and she said, "When I was sick, I was closer to God." And I think for me in my life, that's been very true. Um, there's some connection for me between pain and needing God more. So I might just put that out there for now.
I think that's accurate, but we can come back to that when you ask me the question.
Okay, sure. I'm getting ahead of myself a little. So, Mike, I was wondering, can you tell us how do you practice love for your body?
Sure. Let me try. So to really love my body is to engage in a process of activity buttressed and mediated by contemplation. I mentioned Betcher in the question that Miriam asked us because Betcher says explicitly, as you just indicated through Teresa, actually, illness can give back one's body to the world. When I feel in pain or ill, I have to slow down and, stretch, sometimes laboriously, or drink a cup of tea or coffee, or listen to birdsong rather than frantically writing emails for work or hustling to find other work or doing the things that regular able-bodied people might do on a given day when they have a regular amount of energy. Illness and pain, they don't just point us towards God, but they are a way for me to acknowledge my need for God. And I know even though God gave me the weird and lopsided body that I have, that he wants me to express part of the vulnerability that all people are supposed to have for each other through that body. I can feel God not just by moving through my pain, but actually in my pain. And Bonhoeffer is correct. The suffering God actually does help and does come alongside me in the struggles that I experience with the pain in my legs and my lower back. I practice love for my body most clearly. Sorry, this is the short answer to your question. By resting and by exercising. So when I'm really in pain or really, really tired, like I was, say, the day before yesterday, I know I have to rest. But I also know that having done that, I will have more of an opportunity to get up and use my free weights and resistance bands to do bicep curls or a shoulder press or do push-ups or just go walking around, like to Brantwood Park, which is right outside my house here in Ottawa, or to see my brother or something like that. So it's about rest modulated by periods of activity. And I think that's as true of the periods when I feel well as the periods when I feel ill. And the thing that being in relationship with other people does for that is I know that when I go over to see my brother and his family, for instance, on the one hand, I probably shouldn't be all down on myself if I know I'm really tired or haven't had a great day. On the other hand, I know that I don't have to express all of those negative parts of myself, and I can assess my own mood and step back from it. I know that all of those words made sense. Did they all make sense together?
Definitely.
Excellent.
Yeah. We appreciate you sharing about everything that you do. So thank you so much, Mike.
Of course.
Yeah, Mike, I have the same CP. I have Patrick CP, so I can really relate with all your feelings, or most of your feelings about pain and living in the body. But I don't always experience pain as closeness to God, So we can go talk about that another time or later on too.
Yes.
But for now, Krysia, we want to turn to your piece, and we love that you use the term edge walker. And so Amy and I were thinking about theologies of liberation that continue to develop from edge walkers, from voices of the oppressed and the marginalized. So we wondered if your thinking has been shaped by this continual theology, and how might edge walkers bring about imagination, possibility, and transformation? It's simple questions.
Yeah. It's a really good question, Miriam. I think a lot of my thinking, both academically and non-academically, has been influenced by liberation theologies, although I didn't actually know about liberation theologies until I started my master's degree in 2016. And it was only then that I was lent some books by my then supervisor, who's now at another university, who was a fantastic support in giving me the idea to do a PhD and really supporting me through the application process, that she lent me, I think, some really fantastic books. And I think she may have also lent me the book The Disabled God by Nancy Iceland. And I remember reading it and thinking, how have I not come across this before? I guess I've always, as I said, had this kind of simple notion that everybody's equally in God's image. But it was only really since I've kind of been doing this sort of research into autistic people in churches and how we are perceived and how we may or may not be included, that it's really only some of the bits are kind of bolted together. And I guess also from my experience, I know it can be really kind of bitty. It seems to be that people know these things who are in the know or have insider knowledge, and they don't seem to be part of the mainstream. I certainly never heard about any kind of liberation theology, disabled-led theology, autistic-led theology, queer theology, anything like that in church. And I too, when I heard the term edge walker from a colleague and friend of mine, that I felt, wow, there's people like me. I'm not on my own. And when I was sitting kind of having a look at the questions earlier, I felt it linked quite nicely to intersectionality, but almost the more intersections you sit at, the more you can see. And I think it's these people who can see what perhaps needs to happen, certainly in terms of imagination and transformation. I mean, I certainly know in the UK we have groups who provide communities and who do conferences. So we have one of the key groups that I'm included with is the Disability Conference Planning Team at Inclusive Church, and they've got some fantastic individuals, and everything's co-produced, and it's a real beacon of hope, I find, although they're in a different denomination that I come from. And I think one of the real things that I've found from being with other edge walkers is the fact that we can rethink how we do church, and just sometimes being and meeting and coming together without those other kind of social expectations and other bits and bobs that are physical or social barriers, or if I'm having a really bad sensory day and I'm in burnout and I physically can't go anywhere, there are still ways to kind of be church. And I found those communities have really helped shape my imagination and transformation, and also other disabled and neurodivergent people I know as well. Even though it's still quite pocketed, it feels safe, and it feels like a safe gathering space, which I think is moving in itself and allows for people to undo or be in a space where they can be vulnerable, which I think is really important.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds like you're really doing some important work there.
Yeah.
And so this church that you're helping to imagine, is that something that's going to become more of a reality after the lockdown has passed? Or do you think this is something that, like, the project is something that's going to be take a little bit more time for you to realize?
I guess in terms of the project itself, it existed for a good 8-9 years before I got on board. So there was conferences and gathering spaces pre-COVID, and obviously it's shifted during COVID. And I think what I found really enlightening is how people have taken kind of technology and seen, oh, we can use this, and that there's groups of people going, but we could do this anyway, even if we weren't all stuck at home, because there's people who could really benefit. And it's obviously not just things like Zoom, but in terms of just being able to gather almost in that very small group way of being church as well. And I think in some ways, lockdown has stripped some church groups back to the very bare bones meaning of when two or more of us gather together, you have church. And I think in terms of there will be changes, obviously, as we come out of lockdown, and there still will be gatherings, but I think it's going to be constantly quite dynamic. And I guess the challenge is for the kind of wider narrative of what we perceive as doing church normally, to not these things we're doing now to be seen as a real positive and bonus rather than just a short-term stopgap.
Yeah, thanks. That really helps me to understand. It sounds like there's going to be some incredible stuff happening and coming out of the movement. It's interesting. I was thinking as you were talking, I work for a couple of academic journals as one of my side hustles, and we were having a discussion a few months ago about liberation theology, and one of my colleagues who is working on a PhD in Europe said his professors told him liberation theology is useless and also dead. And I thought, that's interesting. So one of the other more senior editors pushed back and said, well, I'm not sure that that's necessarily true. And so there was this huge kerfuffle. And so there might be some opportunities for people to show how theologies of liberation are still meaningful. And, you know, like you mentioned Nancy Eisland's book, which was, to me, I had the same reaction when I first read it. I was like, how did I not know about this book?
Yeah.
I grew up with such shitty theology, and if I would have read this book, it honestly could have changed my life a lot sooner. So
Yeah.
I really hope that some of these conversations will continue. And I was thinking maybe like our sort of generation of students who are now, you know, like doing PhDs or like finishing PhDs might be a generation who revives some of that theology and reminds people of its importance.
Definitely. I mean, I have a colleague and peer who finished their PhD a couple of years ago, and they looked at disabled people's experiences in churches, and reading their work was a real freshness about it, and it felt fantastic that this was finally getting the attention it deserved, and it wasn't just seen as something we pat on the back and pop in a drawer or a bookcase, or that's seen as dead. It's alive.
Yes, very well said. So I wanted to give you an opportunity now to talk to each other about your work. And also, I wonder if you have any questions for one another that you might want to ask each other. So Mike, I might ask you to go first.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thank you.
Sure. I want to thank you for your for essay, Krysia. It was really interesting, and I think that your perspective is very necessary. I do the things that academics usually do. I wrote down a number of your quotes that I liked. So I have a slightly complicated relationship with church attendance. I think that makes all of us. Like, I was just late for the beginning of our Zoom call in the same way I'm usually physically late to a church sanctuary. I have been asked sometimes not to talk out of turn because I have a loud voice and can be rather outspoken. And again, just Amy mentioned like shitty theology. There's a lot of shitty theology, especially surrounding physical and neurological or emotional experiences of disability. And I think that one of the things we can do as a group of people, as scholars with disabilities, is figure out how to make those experiences more normative and less stigmatized. Who defines the margins and why have they been defined so? I have a colleague at U of T, his name is Peter Hairsnape, and he asks questions about borders all the time because he worked for Christian peacemaker teams. So same kind of question, who gets to say where the center is and why is it there? And you talk about our neurology at the center of our political struggle. I believe that's true. I loved Eastland's book when I read it 12 years ago. It changed my life. And it allowed me to realize that the way I perceived things was not just skewed and fucked up. It was actually a valid perception of the world. And I think people who are neurologically diverse, like us, have important things to say about the ways that society is and is not open to people who embody difference. Our neurology is not just personal perception or perspective, it's a political statement. And to go back to the second wave of feminism, the political is personal. And Leslie, you said sometimes doing the right thing is not safe. I agree. Doing the right thing always requires risk, and it requires being out on the edge at the margins with the other edge walkers, with the other people who are always there. So I really want to affirm your work, and I think it's very important that you're able to do that from your own context. So thank you.
Thank you too for your thoughts.
Of course.
And I think I really liked your poem, and I think I also have and had kind of a love-hate relationship with what I would call my autisticness. Perhaps it manifests a bit differently, but I guess for many years I didn't have the words to know that I was autistic and to know what that meant. So I was angry at God for being different, weird, not having friends. And then when I was told I was autistic, I was angry at him for being autistic.
Yeah.
And I still can be when I face barriers in various settings. And I think that's entwined with a lot of internalized shame and ableism that I kind of piled up throughout the years. And shame at how the way I process kind of sensory information and communication stuff. And when you were talking about Bonhoeffer's Suffering God earlier, it immediately twigged with me that God knows how I process and understand the world, and he's bigger than the double empathy problem. And I think that's why I see the double empathy problem as something that needs to be known in theological and church contexts, because I don't think it's known enough in terms of, and it's beyond autism, it's the way that Damien has said it's applicable is beyond autistic people. He obviously has done quite a bit of work in that field. And I guess that's just shows, kind of makes me think that it's a kind of a human situated thing and not a me thing, which I find quite good. I also found the word paradox in your piece really, really strong and at the center of what was going on as well.
Yeah.
And especially at the end was particularly strong, and that there can be this coexistence as well, because I think sometimes people don't understand that you can be disabled, be neurodivergent, and experience pain, shame, chronic pain, suffering, but actually at the same time that you can like who you are.
Yes.
I think some people don't quite understand that. And certainly I like being autistic, but I hate what I have to go through. So
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're both hitting on is that the paradox at the center of at least our social existence, if not our bodily existence, is a matter of hybridity. And I know that Miriam and I have talked a bit about hybridity before. I think, the most important thing that we can do in churches, like you were saying, Krysia, is talking about empathy. I haven't read Dr. Milton's work, but the double empathy problem sounds very challenging. And I think people with disabilities generally experience a lack of understanding and therefore a lack of empathy from many able-bodied people. And one of the things that we can do as a group of scholars and as people of faith is show people in churches and in the theological academy that God loves diversity in all of its complexity, and that, what am I trying to say? That God wants us to be able to empathize with each other in our diverse experiences, even if that's not always possible in a social context.
Yeah. That even, I think also that God knows that even if there is this kind of what Dr. Damien Milton would call this mismatch of salience, that having the understanding that people aren't all the same and being able to reflect on that shows kind of a understanding and awareness that you're not going to go and put people into inappropriate boxes.
Sure. Yeah.
Wow, thank you both so much. It reminds, both of you remind me of what Robert McKeel calls coming out clip, or coming out neurodivergent, or coming out mad, and the power in naming that, and in being at home in our minds and bodies, even when other people aren't, and even in moments when we aren't, we return to that identity, which is ultimately created by God. And so we give thanks to God for both of you, for all of us, for this open conversation around grief, around love, around justice, and this work in the normative patterns of church. So thank you both. Amy, do you want to say final words?
Yes, we just want to thank both of you so much for coming today. And it's funny, when you were both talking, I was thinking, when I first started my PhD, I had one of the faculty at our school say to me, Amy, you know, you're gonna meet a lot of different people as you're going through your PhD program. And he said, but I promise you, you will eventually find your tribe. And I thought, what's this guy talking about? Tribe? Okay. And then I started going to disability stuff, and I was like, I think I have found my tribe. And today I feel that both of you are part of my tribe. All of us together are doing really important work. And I just appreciate your willingness to come and share and be so vulnerable here with us.
Yeah.
We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and us. This is great.
Yeah.